in YouTube videos, especially when it's a great orchestra like that.
It's the Berlin film.
Yeah. So anyway, so back to your original question, though.
He's just been holding on to that gem. He's like,
yeah. No, I actually just remembered that. But sorry, what was your original question?
Hi everyone, welcome to OSA Backstage. I'm Dani Meyer, and on today's episode, Serena and I are talking to Kevin Tompkins and Juliet Yoshida, members of our violin section. I want to thank Liz LD for her question that kicked this all off. If you have a question, please email it to osabackstage@gmail.com. You could potentially be our next conversation starter and or menace. This was a delight. They're all a delight, but Kevin and Juliet are wonderful. It was a treat to get to talk with them, and it was a treat to make Kevin talk so much. I think you're going to enjoy it as much as we did. Thanks for being here.
Hi guys.
Hi.
hello, have we started already?
We just hit record.
I feel like I'm like,
Serena, I'm gonna have to ask you to like let's have you come in. Just a little.
this is a really deep couch. Like my legs are too short.
It's like I'm way too reclined right now.
Would you like to switch?
No.
Hi. Would you please introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Juliet Yoshida, and I play violin in the Omaha Symphony.
Hi, I'm Kevin Tompkins, also a violinist with the Omaha Symphony.
Do you have a title?
I am Assistant Principal Second Violin with
Awesome.
the Omaha Symphony.
Thank you guys so much. We've been asking everybody the same question. Do you remember the first orchestra concert you went to?
Yeah, it was here, and it was hold on.
You got this.
Hold on.
You can do it.
Carmina Burana. That's what it was.
Wow.
Mhm.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
That's kind of an epic way to start out.
Yeah.
Okay, so just...
I was like, wow, this is loud. It's awesome. I was in this scenario like 4, so yeah.
Whew. Okay, 4.
Wow.
Yeah.
4 for O Fortuna, which is very appropriate. So the most apocalyptic, like every movie bomb about to go off, we're screaming O Fortuna. That was your first orchestra concert.
Yeah.
Was it?
I think I only slept through half of it, so.
I'm proud of you.
Because I was 4, again. I'm just
Sure.
making sure that was last year. No.
Whose idea was that to bring you to Carmina?
I don't know. Probably my dad.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love everything about that.
Yeah.
Mine was not nearly that exciting. I don't remember a specific concert. I do remember my grandparents taking me to see the Greenville Symphony. Shout out to the Greenville Symphony. And their series was called Lollipop Concerts.
Okay, that's cute.
I don't remember what they played, but I can tell you that I got a lollipop at the end. So I remember the important stuff.
That's
so
cute.
I love that they're on brand and that someone was making sure every attendant at the Lollipop concert actually received a lollipop.
Yeah.
That makes me really happy.
Yeah.
So cute.
Okay, so we had Carmina.
It's very different experiences, kind of.
Really opposite ends of the spectrum.
There's definitely no lollipops at the end of Carmina Burana.
Yeah, but you don't need it.
No.
Burana. That's like steak.
I don't know, maybe you do need a
I want to joke of how you need like a cigarette after Carmina Burana.
Again, 4.
Sorry. Oh, man. How about the first concert you ever played in an orchestra?
Also, can't really put an exact pin on it.
It's hard to really remember, right?
Yeah, like a full orchestra, I would have been middle school for me, so it was like the lower level youth orchestra. I'm sure playing like an arrangement of Beethoven 5 or something. So I don't know if that really counts, but
It does. I think it does. For
that
orchestra.
kind of deal.
Nice.
Like winds and brass and everything.
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's probably a good distinction to make, right? Because if you have an orchestra program in your school,
Right.
then you've been playing an orchestra for as long as you've been playing an instrument. But, growing up, I only got a few years with an orchestra at school because of a string program in Buffalo. And then we moved back to Delaware, some wind ensembles from then on because they didn't have a school in-school orchestra program where I was.
Oh, okay.
So youth orchestra was where I played like my first
Yeah.
big orchestra pieces.
So how old are you then?
And that's not entirely community orchestra and then youth orchestra, so like 12.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, I was in string orchestra for like a while. So my first string orchestra experience, we played this like little kid version of Meister Singers. And Boone Garden was conducting. Shout out to our CEO.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I was like third chair, second violin. And I was like, all right, Meister Singer. Yeah. Does not sound like the real thing, turns out. That's
Shocked.
very watered down version. But yeah, that's it.
You have none of your musical choices so far have been like
Normal.
Oh, that makes me so happy. But yes, our CEO was a conductor for a long time, a trumpet player before then a conductor, and obviously now an executive director, CEO.
Mm-hmm.
I love that she conducted you in this like mini me version of Meister Singer.
Yeah. She would tune my violin every Sunday. And that was awesome.
We're gonna circle back to that. Oh my god. What about those first when you got to play with winds and brass and percussion? Were you surprised by anything, or was that because your dad was the longtime principal percussionist of this symphony, so it wasn't like symphonies where you were a stranger to symphonies, but what was it like playing in one for the first time?
Yeah, I guess that's the thing. It's like when you sit backstage so many times, it's like a very small distance change to then sitting on the stage and making the sound. So didn't feel that, different
awesome.
or life altering. I was like, oh yeah, now I'm just like sitting in the middle of the sound instead of on the edge. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's like when you grow up playing music, it's every stage you get to, like you play in youth orchestra and it's like, wow, there's winds here and there's percussion, and it's more just of like the fact that they're there. And then I remember very specifically when I went to college and like hearing the cellos, I forget what we were playing, but hearing the cello section with like all of a sudden more cellos, and they were all really great players. And I specifically remember that sound because that was the first time I'd heard that level of like section playing from a string section. And that was, I mean, it obviously left an imprint with me. So
that was even more the level, like getting to play with people.
It's like you just notice different things as you go. Yeah. In my experience. So speaking of noticing different things. So the reason why we wanted to talk with you guys, besides just wanting to talk with you guys, we got an audience question, which is from a good friend of mine who's a menace, and I love her, but she's a menace. And the setup of the question is mostly a joke, but I think it's a great place to leave off from. So the setup is, could someone who's not a violinist or string player at all pick up a violin, not unlike Steve Buscemi, hello fellow kids, backward ball cap, walk on stage, sit down in the middle of it, and pretend to play? Could they do that? And then how long would it take for people to notice something was wrong? No, they could not do that. And it would take about 5 seconds for people. The thing about orchestra playing is before you even make a sound, there's so many little mannerisms that you just accumulate as you go.
Okay.
Of just like, it's almost like etiquette almost. Like you would notice just by how somebody was sort of just carrying themselves almost. You'd be like, I don't know if
the violin.
Or yeah, right. Like exactly. Like they'd be sitting there not ready to play, and you'd be like, you're holding this wrong, or you're, yeah. It would be somewhat akin to like if you threw me on the basketball court with the LA Lakers, and like, yeah, you would notice pretty quickly that somebody was not supposed to be there. So,
because even with like a substitute, I felt this a couple times when I got to play with another orchestra. There's a feeling of like, I don't know where stuff goes. I don't know how you, even though you're very comfortable with your instrument, the space is completely different. So you were talking about, you were backstage for so long and then you finally got to walk on stage, but that felt really natural for you. I imagine for some people that first time is not nearly as natural. Like when you, do you remember when you first started playing with us? Like, was there any of that trying to figure out the vibe?
Yeah, for sure. Anytime you play, I remember it specifically here in Omaha when I got here, and really anytime you like play with any other professional orchestra, you have to get used to, like, every orchestra has a slightly different rhythmic approach. Every orchestra has a slightly different approach to their sound. And it's like when you play with an orchestra for the first time, you have to like have your antennas out really, really like attuned so that you can very quickly adjust to those things. I remember getting here and having to feel a little bit more of a delay, like from the conductor's beat to like when my sound should start. And I don't remember why that would have been at that point in time, what orchestra I had played with most recently that might have been a little bit different in their approach. But yeah, I do remember. And, you kind of just try your best to be very adaptable. And after a while, it becomes like second nature. So.
But then that becomes what you guys were talking about. Like you walk on stage and you're just automatically in that mindset. Mm-hmm. But when you're first walking on stage, what are the things? Okay, so let's say it's a new Masterworks week. Mm-hmm. And let's go back to Elgar, where it's a piece that's unfamiliar pretty much the entire orchestra, and we're all learning this together. So what are you watching for? It's not enough that you just know your part. You guys are the largest section on stage. Between even just one first violin or second violin alone, it's the largest section on stage. Then you combine that sound, and it's a third of the string section easily, right? Mm-hmm. So besides your part, what are you watching and listening for as you simultaneously play your instrument and check in with the conductor?
I mean, I think it's a really interesting thing that you brought up the fact that the Elgar is unfamiliar, because I think if an orchestra has like a history with a piece, then I'm much more, as someone who hasn't been here as long as some people, like I'm much more attuned to what other people in my own section are doing and making sure that I'm doing it that way. If that makes, like they may place something in a specific place because that's just how they've always done it. So I make sure that I'm blending into that texture. And when we're all figuring it out together, then you kind of have a little more freedom, I guess I would say. Like we're all figuring out where we're going to place that together as a unit. So your initial input in the first rehearsal kind of decides where things are going to be placed. Help me out here.
No, I agree with that. Excuse me. And I would say also we had a guest conductor that week. So there's also that element too of like every conductor is a little different. So I found myself saying to myself, like, okay, let's make sure to really like look out of the part, look at the conductor a lot, even maybe more than usual, just to really get a handle on what their, kind of mannerisms are, how to, so that when you get to the performance that you're not surprised by something. So making sure to look up a lot. And then on that same idea, there's places in a piece like that where there are few options for how you could play it, what part of the bow, what string, if somebody's playing it, if you're in a higher position on a lower string, that kind of thing. So in that first rehearsal, especially knowing what those spots are, that when I was practicing, I might have thought, I wonder what part of the bow we're going to play this in, and then making sure to look at Susanna or look at Keith. So we're figuring that out right away, so that then as the rehearsal goes along, then we can be, focusing on the musical stuff and not figuring that stuff out, a little too late in the game. So.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Obviously, it's like you really don't want to be noticed at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like ideally, I think it sounds like the ideal situation is that everyone is doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. I knew it was long.
It's like a school of fish or like a herd of zebra. Like, right?
Okay.
If you stick out, like,
Yeah.
so you really don't want to be that person.
On the other side of the coin, the danger with what that I find a lot in being a member of a violin section, because there's so many of us, is yes, you want to blend, but also like you have to be careful that you don't find yourself hiding. You can develop a very bad habit of like playing unconfidently and sort of hiding, not for any like lack of preparation or anything. Just it's easy to do. There's that many people, and you've been told so many times like don't stick out. So it's finding a good balance for me of like we're blending, we're matching with our section leaders, but we're also like contributing, right? You want to be a very strong contributor to the section sound.
So how do you walk that tightrope? Is that so you mentioned like Susanna and Keith, right? Like, is that watching them to see what their level of, because sometimes like it's very easy to see the physicality of how much they're adding. Sometimes if someone's not necessarily in our orchestra, but when Pat and I watch all these German orchestras and their YouTube videos, and if there's one person who's just like going for the home run or going 1,000%, and there's a person next to them who's not, it's almost,
It's funny, yeah.
It's funny, but it's distracting.
Yeah.
So how do you walk that tightrope?
It's funny you said that about watching videos, because I remember very specifically and I don't think I'm going to offend anybody because it's a really old recording, but there's a video of Berlin Phil doing Dvorak 8, I think Dvorak 8 or Dvorak 9, and it's Karajan, so it's old, and it like pans over this one violinist in one of the like difficult passages, and it's just like the bow is just like 3 inches above the string, and like just completely like major faking going on. So it is like it's a rare gem when you kind of find that in YouTube videos, especially when it's a great orchestra like that.
It's the Berlin Phil.
Yeah. So anyway, so back to your original question though.
He's just been holding on to that gem. He's like,
Yeah, no, I actually just remembered that. But sorry, what was your original question?
Okay, so you don't want to be distracting.
Yes.
You don't want to hide.
Yeah.
So how do you know that you're not doing either?
I think it's just experience and trusting your judgment. I think you have to know as a string player that, I mean, you kind of want that sound of the section leading from the back of the section, actually. So you have to know that you're following the lead of your section leader, and then you also are making sure to listen very carefully to make sure that that your sound is congruent with everybody else, but still confident and still contributing. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Or
I'm
probably a little different. I'm in second violins all the time, so it might be a little different in the first. But
yeah, so Juliet, you go back and
mean,
forth.
It's because I'm usually last stand, so it's like this crazy distance thing where like we're all following, right? So there can be, as you're playing telephone, a slight delay can develop throughout the section. So I try to, as the back of the stand, I know it's myself and the stand in front of me, whoever that is, we try really hard to be right with Susanna so that time-wise, like the sandwich lines up and we're not creating this like wave effect, you know? So I try to know my part well enough that I can look up quite a bit more than I would if I was just sitting in the middle of the section. So I look up and I make sure am I in the right part of the bow? Is my bow moving at the same speed? Am I timing the rubato exactly? Like if there's a rubato or something, my eyes are just completely on her and I don't look at the music because I can't trust that, you know, I have to make sure that it's right with, and there's like sound delay and stuff. So it's really a visual thing at that point. I can't wait for the sound to get to me.
So it's not that you can't wait for the sound to get to you.
I can't hear it and then react because then I'm most certainly going to be like a 16th note behind. So I know from rehearsals, I know how it goes, right? And as soon as I see her bow move my bow, she has to be like a mirror, right? It has to be exactly at the same time visually. And that's my way of making sure that I'm not creating a delay.
Because especially in a room like at the Holland Center, like if you're only relying on what you're hearing too, you might be hearing the sound coming back to you from like you're going to get some weird delay depending on where you are on the stage. So yeah, a lot of times visual is
key,
important. Yeah. And just anticipating.
I had, when I was at school, Georgia Flazanis, who was the concertmaster of the Minnesota Orchestra, I got to play in a quintet with her for like a hot second. And she asked me to memorize a small chunk of it so that we could just make eye contact the whole time. And I was an idiot, so I made a joke about it. And I've never been met with such ferocious, like, it's a measure. And there was no more joking for the rest of the quintet. But the point was that in that moment, it is far more important for us to be locked in than for you to second guess what you have on the page. So you better know what's on the page so that we don't mess this up together. And so that's what that sounds like, is that you're memorizing these chunks of music so that you can essentially be mirroring Susanna or Keith, depending on what section you're playing in.
Sure. I do find, well, I mean, Serena, you can probably speak to this because you haven't been here that long. And I feel like the Holland has this beautiful glow, but it also creates this atmosphere where I want to wait and hear the sound. So do you find that this orchestra is like, it's like when you're sitting in traffic and the light turns green, there's like a 2-second delay? Like different cities are different, right? Like in Nashville, if you don't step on the gas right away, you're going to get mowed down. Here, it's like, I wait for like 4 seconds before I go because I know everyone's going to run the red light, right? So I feel like, do you feel like this orchestra has like a delay of?
It depends. I found on what the seating setup is actually. So the further the string players are away from each other, the principals, so like if there's more stuff in front of them, then the more, because they're so used to checking in with each other, I guess, both visually and with their ears, because they're trying to do the same but so much further apart, that gets more difficult. So I think absolutely there's a kind of, there's an instinct to do it, and generally it works really well. It's just certain concerts, there are different setups, and that can make things difficult to hear across the stage, especially.
And you were saying earlier that if it's a piece we're super familiar with, you kind of, if you've been with the orchestra and played that before, the orchestra's played it before, you're kind of like easing into what that existing interpretation is.
The car drives itself.
But let's say, okay, was there a standard piece of rep that we've done recently that neither of you had played before with this orchestra, do you think?
Beethoven 6.
Okay.
That's one of those weird pieces that kind of slipped past me in my younger, like I just have not played it. So that's a good example of, like, I'm sure a lot of people in the orchestra have played it 4 or 5 times with the Omaha Symphony, and maybe they have more of a feeling for, like, this is kind of how we do it. Or we play this passage, Sol G, or, there is a spot in the scherzo like that. So yeah, that's an example of like a pretty standard piece of rep that was newer to me in this orchestra.
Are those items marked in the part?
Sometimes. Not always. Yeah, just depends. But
how much of what your section is doing? So in a string part, obviously there's things that are non-negotiable. Bowings, articulation.
Bowings are always negotiable. Depending on
what.
There's wiggle room. We wiggle until the concert, and then by then on the concert day we've solidified. But
let me restate. Bowings as a section are non-negotiable. The bowings themselves as a section you can negotiate throughout the rehearsal process. But
I can't decide to do my own bowing that's opposite of everybody else. It would look awesome, hilarious. but I might get in trouble.
You might get.
I think that's what you mean. Yeah.
What are the other reasons why it's a horrible decision to go out on your own, bowing wise?
Well, go ahead.
I mean, you're gonna slam into someone else's bow if you're going.
Yeah.
I mean, free bowing is nice, but if there's like rhythms, you're gonna still.
I mean, the whole idea of everybody matching bowings is we want to match articulations. We want to match sound. It does look visually nice, so there's that. But there are times where I've had conductors ask for opposite bowings. A lot of times it's where they're hearing an accent on the down bows and it's uneven. And so they'll ask for inside players to be backwards from outside players so that, like, it's a lot of times it's if there's a bunch of accents in a row so that they're all the same. So it happens. But
Oh, okay.
it's very niche, like
My
stories here.
My brain just imploded briefly. The idea of like, I'm trying to visualize this. I want to stand. Okay, so let's say you and I are a stand. At least you both have your violin on your left arm, so you're not going.
You should not, even if you're playing a backwards bow, you should not crash into somebody. Ideally,
Okay.
maybe it depends on what string you're on because that affects the angle too. But yeah.
So the possibility for collision is usually minimal.
Yeah, I mean you're
but
definitely
not
increasing.
the zero amount because it is most
I
certainly
feel
happened
like-
to be in the pit.
Right, I was just gonna say, I feel like Julia has a story here.
Yeah.
So, what was this collision?
I
In the
mean,
pit?
not naming any names,
No.
but with a pit is very close quarters. So I definitely had someone we were bowing, and while my bow was like, I was out at the tip, and then somebody's scroll came down and slapped my bow out of my hand. So
Do you
Yeah.
remember what it was? The piece? Like Nutcracker? Or-
This would have been opera.
it was
right?
opera.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
some athletic.
It's actually it's important, especially when you're in an opera pit, but kind of always, it is important to be very respectful of, like, you can move musically, but, like, you need to stay within your bubble and, like, you need to not be so enthusiastic that
Spatial
you're gonna,
awareness is
like, crash into somebody because people's instruments are very expensive. Like, and it's, like, that's one of your kind of responsibilities is, like, let's, be respectful of everybody's space because it's a lot of people all on one stage all together.
It's a lot of people, and they're all far too delicate for, like, they look delicate, but then it's like the smallest thing can
you talking
shift.
about the people or the instruments?
The instruments.
Actually, I do want to ask though what your perspective is. Speaking of moving and is it helpful? Do you find if you're sitting further back in the section that you move less, and that the further up you kind of move more to cue? Do you find it helpful to move with the person in front? Is there?
Yeah, I mean, I think if everybody's moving together and the same amount, then that's good.
Like jellyfish in the ocean.
Yeah, I think you're right that, like, ideally the front stands are going to be the ones gesturing more obviously, and then maybe as we go back in the section, we're more mirroring that, but less, like, actively.
Because there's a cue, and then there's
Yeah.
there's movement.
Yeah.
And so should the cue only really come from the head of the section, or is it a collective?
Is it helpful to all cue together sometimes?
Definitely, yes, it is. I think the question is, like, the person at the front of the section is more of the initiator, and then we're making you want to make a musical motion. I mean, nobody's going to start from just, like, perfectly still, hopefully. But yeah, I think it's you're just, like, taking what you see and then responding musically to it. Does that make sense?
It does. Speaking of the head of the section, so something that I was just thinking of, this romance novel synopsis where it's
Love
like a cellist was the concertmaster somehow, and I wanted to throw that book across the room.
Yeah.
So we have a concertmaster,
Mm-hmm.
it is the first violin.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just talk a little bit about a concertmaster's role versus, because every other section has a principal, even obviously second violins have a principal, and then an associate principal, usually an assistant principal, and so on and so forth, a leadership structure. But how is a concertmaster different from those principal roles?
I mean, this seems like an excellent question for Susanna, our concertmaster.
That's fair.
However, I mean, it's just like they're expected to play solos with the orchestra. I mean, I think she probably knows the score forwards and backwards, and Q knows what all the other sections have, has thought about bowings in a thoughtful way for the entire orchestra, probably, I would guess. And I think, like, again, yet another question for Keith, probably, but I'm sure Keith is always making his bowings so that they're relating to Susanna, phrasing in a way that helps Susanna's phrasing that she's dictating to her section, and so on and so forth around the circle of the string players. So
yeah, and I mean the concertmaster has this very important role as like the liaison to the conductor. I mean, so really above any other section principal, it should be the concertmaster that's both verbally and non-verbally like communicating with the conductor, and then that gets transferred to the rest of the orchestra through the principals. So yeah, it's very, kind of strict like chain of command, but when it works correctly, it makes it possible to learn a lot of repertoire very well, very quickly, because everybody kind of knows their role and knows how to manage that.
And concertmaster is kind of like a port in the storm in a way.
Yeah.
Like I've always loved watching Susanna because I've got maybe the best seat in the house sometimes, I think, as far as being able to see her perfectly and see what she's doing and how she's approaching things. But something I learned with a friend of ours who's now in the Cincinnati Symphony, Lizzie Ferruta, not everybody wants to be a concertmaster, which was, when you're growing up in school, everyone wants to be first chair. At least I always thought everybody wants to be first chair. At what point, as violinists, do you think you make a distinction of what you want? Do I want to be in the section? Do I want a leadership role? Do I want a concertmaster role? What am I going for?
I mean, it's a little bit like Juliet was mentioning with when you're a concertmaster, I mean, you're probably going to be playing a concerto every year, most of the time. A lot of solos within orchestral pieces. And so if that's more of your personality as a player, then that might be what you kind of go into. I don't know that it depends on the person too. If somebody is like, I want a section job, that's where I feel comfortable. But there's others that they might have, a section job, but they still practice their concertmaster excerpts and take auditions for those kind of leadership roles. So I think it depends on the person too. But you're right, there is some specialization or differentiation between those roles, and like when you're figuring out what you want to do as a musician.
No, I just want to say, I mean, Juliet had a solo in the Elgar Last
did.
Stand.
Killed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is true. I did have a solo.
Last Stand solo.
And
And I think that was interesting to me because, that was the question of balance too. Can you hear? And definitely, I don't know if that is there is that gap between section playing where you are trying to blend, but somehow all violinists, at least for me, like when a concertmaster has a solo or when only the Last Stand was playing, always audible. So it feels like you guys have this extra gear of, okay, now it's a solo, now we're going to play out. So yes, it's interesting to hear that difference in your sound.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because again, I didn't know that piece very well at all. I actually had to listen to a few recordings, and I looked online, and you could always hear the Last Stand solo, and it's always marked piano. So we had to think about it, my stand partner too, like if it's marked piano, you can always hear it, and you're playing with an entire French horn section?
Mm-hmm.
Does he really mean piano, or does he mean like the serenity of the sound of piano, the smoothness of piano, while projecting? Because if you can't hear it, then why would he have written it, so
That is exactly how wind players actually look at their parts. Exactly what you just described. Because wind players look at piano, it's like, it's not piano. Like you never,
Right.
it's exactly what you said, the serenity of the the sound of piano or something like that. But you never play piano unless it's this one kind of wind chord, nothing else is happening and playing. Then you can kind of play with that extreme in the dynamic range. But that's very interesting because exactly. We're always playing out and pushing, basically.
Especially when you have a solo, like you can't look at piano, the dynamic, and think like quiet or like wispy or, like it can get very like,
Exactly.
you have to make sure you're thinking about it in a way that's like, this is going to project, like this is going to carry musical intent, right? Because there's a lot of like piano when you're playing with 24 other violins is very different. So
Well, the exact opposite. In the concerto we did with the Elgar, the Dvorak, there's fortes written all over that thing, and you're really not supposed to play any of them.
That's true, actually. Yes.
Yeah,
it's an attitude, not a volume.
Right. Well, no, that's right. Then exactly the opposite happens, where clearly he couldn't have meant the entire orchestra plays forte versus one solo instrument, and then again, then you're looking at how do I express the attitude versus
I like that very much. It's the attitude, not the actual. Because again, it's either stupidity or naivete, and I'm gonna decide it's the latter. But when I remember Brett Brevard, Craig Brown, it's like, there's a poor violinist up there is trying to be heard. Why the hell are you playing fortissimo? It's like, because it's in the part. It's a concerto.
Yeah.
And so those are them. I really like that. I really like how you describe it. It's the serenity of piano, but it's not necessarily the volume of piano. You guys also, so Kevin, you're parked in the second violins. But Juliet, you go back and forth. Is there an approach, is there an attitude that you bring to playing in either of those sections that you have to adjust everything from your dynamic? Okay, so talk about that.
Yeah. And I played in the seconds basically exclusively for 8 years here. And I didn't start moving back and forth until a little more recently. But I learned a lot from sitting in the first. Like I really, in the seconds, I feel like maybe I thought, okay, this is a supporting role more. Like I don't want to get in the way of the solo line in the first violins. And now that I'm in the first, when I'm in the seconds, I feel much more freedom to play louder. If I hear them playing an octave above me, I really make sure I'm pumping up the sound, because I know how exposed and naked feeling it can feel if you have something really high in the first. The seconds support is huge, and the seconds are just like the meat of the sound, really, and the firsts are really just a veneer, thin veneer over that.
So even how you define supportive has changed. So because before it sounds like supportive was just like meh, like here's this like little underpinning, and now it's, I got you, I'm going to go for big beefy just to make sure you have something to float on top of.
Yeah, like I used to think I'm just like this like beautiful carpet that's like staying out of the way, and now I'm like holding them up so they can like reach, you know what I mean? And it's I try to play like when I'm in the first, what I feel like I need myself. So I think that has definitely changed how I approach both too, because I feel like in the first, I know that the seconds have me, and I don't have to like scream. I can just let the sound be beautiful. And
I feel like, I don't play first violin very much. I sometimes in summer orchestras and stuff, I play first, and it almost feels like you do better as in first violin if you like remember to like relax and like just like kind of coast isn't the right word, but like don't force.
Mm-hmm.
I think, whereas not that you would force in the seconds, but I think when you're playing second violin, there is a little more like activity there that you have to like be a little more assertive and supportive, is what I find. So
That's super cool. I wouldn't have thought of it that way. It's like it's very Atlas
Mm-hmm.
holding up.
yeah.
How do these roles change? So you've gotten used to sitting in ideally like sections of 12, right? First and second violins each.
Ideally, yeah.
Ideally would be great.
Yeah.
But violins are also chamber music, string quartets. There's 8 billion string quartets out there, and I know you both play them. And what is that like to go from a section of 12 to a section of 1, but to still be in first versus second violin roles?
Well, we play in quartet together
Mhm.
all the time. And in quartet, usually Kevin plays first. Occasionally we'll switch. But
Mhm.
so I think it's the same, you know, it's just being aware of what your part, like what serves the music dynamically, structurally, like making sure that everyone's voices are being heard.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with when you do a string quartet is all of a sudden it's less of we're all following the conductor together, and now in a string quartet we're making group decisions, which is can be a little more chaotic because it's 4 people with
Rehearsals are
4
longer.
different opinions, and so that's honestly what is for me the biggest adjustment between like a orchestra rehearsal and a chamber music rehearsal is in the quartet setting. Like it's just a whole different like approach, and like you have to like work very well with the other 3 people while at the same time like saying this is how I think we should phrase this, or like you have to say what you think, but at the same time like work together with 4 people. So
We get into punching matches. How about the rubato this
yeah
one?
ideally avoiding
So,
big blow-ups.
so ideally no dictators, but also hopefully not governing by committee at the same time.
Yeah, it just depends on the group. I mean, there are quartets, I think, especially old-fashioned, like back in the day. I think it was like the first violinist was kind of in charge. I don't think people do that really as much anymore.
Which is nice.
There are times where, like, in a quartet where you're just like, somebody has to make a decision. Like, we've talked about this too much. Like, just somebody decide, and like, we're just going to do that because there's a practical thing of like,
I want
the
to go home and eat
performances, we need to
dinner.
go home. Like, the performance is in 3 days. Like, we can't debate this, like,
Anymore.
rubato versus, non or whatever it is, or do this up bow or down bow. It's just like somebody just decide. But,
Really quickly,
So
the whole
funny.
the whole bowing thing cracks me up because I don't think if you're not a string player, you touched on this. The bowing affects articulation. It affects the sound. It affects the bowing is so important. But if you're not a string player, just like it's just up and down. Why is this a thing?
Also, like, deeply personal, I think, too, like with who you've studied with, like what you're like, there's so many ways to interpret like how you want to do a bowing, and people have strong opinions about bowings,
Oh yeah.
unfortunately. So like, it seems like you're a wind player.
Yes.
Okay, I should Google you. I don't know what
That's
instrument.
okay.
What instrument do you play?
Flute.
Okay. I'm sure when we start talking about bowings, you guys are just like,
No, it's as a wind player. No, now I'm fascinated as someone who has to kind of know or understand. I took cello lessons for a bit and violin. I know. Cello
no,
first.
that's good.
To kind of just understand the feeling a little bit more. But yes, wind players, it's interesting because a conductor would never say, well, could you tongue that note in this? You would never instruct wind or brass players to do something as specific as conductors instruct string players. But that is almost, again, I guess, to the effect of someone just has to make a decision. Because you can see kind of certain players are interpreting certain things in the music differently, and to just be very clear and direct and say, I'd like this part, and
I have almost come to blows with Nate over certain bowing choices that he's made, and
it's everybody has their own slightly different approach. Closest thing I would think with wind players would be sorry, I don't talk this much usually. I'm losing my voice. With wind players, I feel like sometimes, not always, but sometimes conductors will say like, "Can you wait to breathe until?"
Yes.
Like that's like the closest
Controlling
thing I would
breathing,
think.
yeah.
Which is not exactly this like analogous situation, I guess. But yeah, I mean, depending on the conductor, they'll get into bowings.
Or they'll come with their own bowing,
Right,
own
bowed
bowed
parts
parts.
which in a way is helpful because then at least you know who to blame if you don't like them.
Yes, absolutely.
And
And
I-
then you
oh,
can,
go ahead.
yeah, no.
Oh, I feel like I always appreciate when I'm okay with kind of whatever the bowing is, if it is well reasoned musically, and if there's a reason for it, then that's like, then you're off on the right foot. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just a bowing for bowing's sake. This is my musical idea, and this is how we're going to get it, which is useful.
Yeah, and I think in a quartet situation or a quintet situation, any chamber music, if you're right, if you come in with a thoughtful approach, I'd like to do X, Y, and Z. The person with the hardest part, I think, usually gets to dictate what's happening, which often is you guys, but it's occasionally shared by other members of the group.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you prefer? Would you say ultimately, do you prefer playing in orchestra or chamber music, or does it just totally depend on the piece and the week?
I don't know. I mean, chamber music, you're more a master of your own fate, you know? But orchestra, nothing compares to like the grandeur of the sound, you know what I mean? Like, so it depends, I guess, on their repertoire. I was just thinking, like, the first time I was in full orchestra was the Planets, I think. And we did the Planets for Allstate.
Oh man,
Wow.
I have a similar. Yeah,
And I was concertmaster. And it was and we did Rodeo, and there was a little solo, and I was like, can't do it. I can't play loud enough for them to hear me. But yeah, it was like, it's just like, you know, when Jupiter, that melody comes in, you're just like, I'm not gonna cry on stage. I'm not gonna do it. So
you can cry on stage. It's just that's not just.
Have you ever cried on stage during your performance?
I feel like that movement, because of like my connection to it as a kid, and I have a kid now, so we watched that Bluey episode where they have the Jupiter thing, and I can't even think about it. I can't even think about it, you guys. I will real well up right now just thinking about that cartoon. So yeah, I think that piece might be one of the few. That and like Emperor Concerto.
Oh, that's fun.
Okay.
All right, everyone watch Juliet during the concert.
Yeah.
During
Turn around. Don't look at me.
Yeah, I'm not much of a crier. I'm more like, this is funny, I'm more likely to like tear up like if I'm just like listening to a piece, like just at home listening to a piece that either like I haven't. There we go.
The lights went off again. If you're just listening to the audio, this is the second time the lights have gone off. So Kevin's more likely to tear up when he's just at home listening.
Yeah, or like a piece that like I haven't heard in a while, that like it kind of hits me right in the feels. You know, that's more likely to. When I'm performing or like in a rehearsal, it's like I'm honestly so like focused in on like the, I don't know, that element of it, the playing element of it, that it's less likely to happen like while playing. But yeah.
Oh, this is good. What's your guys' cry piece? Now I'm really curious.
If it's, I feel the same. Where if it's just performing or in the moment, it's just too much
Right.
stuff. But listening, probably like Waltz of the Flowers was my whole cry piece for a long time.
Interesting.
It's really sweet.
That's very on brand.
Yeah.
End of Sibelius 2.
Okay.
Because it's just like, I just associate that. That was one of my favorite concerts ever when I got to sub with Cincinnati. And then that was one of the concerts we did coming back from the pandemic. So you know how we rotated string players in, and that was the one I got to play. So it's 3 bass players, for Sibelius.
So that's like
It was just like, you know, everyone's socially distanced, and I've never worked harder in my entire life. I was exhausted, and we got to the end, and I was just so proud, to be there that I definitely was tearing up. But I try not to get verklempt. You guys have more notes than I do, so generally, if I do get verklempt, it's a lot easier for me to just like take a knee and then stir back up with that.
Yeah,
we don't have rest. It's like it's like sneezing while driving. You don't want to do it. You can't see the notes.
Yeah.
If that ever happens to us, if we ever have a bass part like that, I get irrationally upset. It's like, whose idea was this? I can't even blink. Not what bass players do. That makes me happy. Kevin, how about you? Quartet or orchestra?
Honestly, it's like ideally I'm really lucky to be in a situation where I get to do both. Yeah. So that's the ideal. I mean, at this point, I'm so specialized in orchestral stuff that like I think that's what I would like. If you made me pick one that I was going to do forever, I would probably pick orchestra. I mean, and I do. I mean, I love playing an orchestra. Like it's like what I spend the majority of my time doing. But yeah, ideally, it is nice to be able to kind of float between both worlds a little bit.
Nice. We're almost at that time. You have both been in the violin section and been violinists for. Did either of you start with a different instrument? I didn't ask.
No.
Nope.
Hey, okay.
Wow.
This is the first time, right?
Might be the first time. What about Patrick?
He started on piano, trumpet, and valve trombone. Yeah.
I don't remember about Nick Fitton.
No, you're right, Nick.
Nick Fitton also started on flute.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I wanted to play the flute, but you can't start that until like I started in 4th grade. And they were like, you gotta wait until 5th grade to start flute. And I was like, all right, I guess I'll play the violin for a year. And then, things happen.
Good things happen.
Yeah.
Good things.
In South Carolina, was it violin like your first option?
Yeah, my older brother is also a violinist. So typical younger brother thing. I just was like, well, I would like to do that because he's doing it. So that's where I got started.
You guys have very different reactions than I had to my older brother, which was
I'm not doing that.
He came home with the violin and I was just like, that thing hurts. It's so high. What is the point? I would like to play
so
cello.
Had the opposite reaction. Okay.
Right. I wanted to play cello, and then they ran out of cellos, so I was tricked into bass. But my brother's an excellent violinist now. Sorry, John. That's okay. But if you could play, would it be flute? If you could play any other instrument, like let's say everybody's on stage, you got 30 minutes, you can pick any instrument, no consequences.
So in this scenario, can I play it very well, or am I just like tooting sounds?
That's my question too.
I think you just are. You can try it.
Oh,
okay, so
definitely.
I thought about this.
Yes.
I would probably, if you were just like 30 minutes of like I would probably be a percussionist for 30 minutes because I feel like I can make a sound. I can make it. Essentially happen. They have a lot of different instruments, so that would be fun. But yeah, I feel like if you handed me a trumpet, I just would not be able to even make a sound. So I don't know if that would go very well.
It wouldn't be as enjoyable.
No.
I think the joy is in the attempt, really.
So bassoon. We're taking
bassoon.
Way different approaches.
Yeah, bassoon, really?
What
I've learned from this is that Kevin and I are not the same person.
Yeah.
Not that I didn't know that before, but.
Oh my God. You were asking me last week if this was an Oprah moment scenario where like the instrument you named, I just reached behind my chair and pulled out.
Yeah.
Now's your chance.
I was like, reach under your seat, folks. No,
now I'm just sad.
Well, ask Karen Sandeden really nicely if she'll let you try contra. Because Nick did, and you don't even have to buzz or anything. You can
just blow into it?
You can just blow into it and put your fingers where they tell you, and it makes a really low B flat.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can change your answer now?
I might have to reconsider that. I'll think about it.
Some bassoon converts.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes.